Hello again, Mystery Series fans. Corinne Smith here, ready to talk about books again. And when I published those two videos about Louise Penny's Armand Gamache books, some people reached out to me and asked for other recommendations for other series that they could latch onto, which I'm happy to give recommendations to. For a long time, I followed dozens of mystery series, and I'm not kidding. I think maybe 20, 25, well, 24 about. A convenient strategy if you can work it, because you know not every author is going to be on the same schedule. You know that most books maybe take a year to get published, and you don't want to wait a year for your favorite books to come out. So if you time it right, with the right combination of books and authors, you could maybe get a new one in your favorite series every month or two. Try it out. See if you can come up with something like that. I used to do that. I've gotten out of the habit of that fantastical mystery reading experience. It was glorious. One author who I really enjoyed reading is Susan Wittig Albert, and that's who I want to talk with you about today. She was in Texas and is still writing, so I caught up with her work again so that we could have this conversation. So Susan is right here. Okay, there's Susan. I even had a chance to meet her maybe 15 years ago. I was working in a small public library and running a mystery book discussion group, and we found out that she was going to be in the area for a conference. So we decided to read one of her books for our book of the month and invite her, see if she would come and speak. And she did, and it was great. She's a lovely person. Hi, Susan. Thank you again for visiting our library, in case you're watching. So I had a chance to meet her, and we chatted, obviously chatted about the book, but also about her writing and all kinds of stuff. And she's a very busy person, a very prolific writer. So what I want to talk with you about today are the 4 mystery series that she's given us. She's written an awful lot of other books too, but we're just going to concentrate on these 4 mystery series. So first up is the China Bayles series. That's the name of the main character, China Bayles, B-A-Y-L-E-S. And the first book in the series is called Time of Death, and that's T-H-Y-M-E. Okay, Time of Death came out in 1992. These books are set in Pecan Springs, Texas, which is a small fictional town of about 15,000 residents located between Austin and San Antonio, right off Interstate 35. This is what Susan tells us about the setting. This novel is set in the imaginary Texas town of Pecan Springs, which includes such fictitious elements as the campus of Central Texas State University and the Pecan River. Readers familiar with the Central Texas Hill Country, should not confuse Pecan Springs with such real towns and villages as San Marcos, New Braunfels, Wimberley, or Fredericksburg, or CTSU with local universities. The author has created the fictional characters and events of this book for the reader's pleasure and intends no connection to real people or happenings. Okay, so China Bayles is the main character. She runs an herb shop in Pecan Springs. China was a criminal lawyer in Houston for 15 years and decided to chuck that career and move to a small town and open an herb shop. Her herb shop, Time and Seasons, is right next door to a New Age place called the Crystal Cave, run by Ruby Wilcox. And Ruby and China become good friends. By the time we catch up to them in this first book, China's been in business a few years. She and Ruby know people in the area. They also know some people associated with and working for the local police department. But whenever something untoward happens, China does her best to try to figure out what's happening, and often Ruby goes along with whatever she's got planned. Since Pecan Springs is also a college town, a lot of other interesting things can happen here. And as you read through the series, as we go, China and Ruby both go through a lot of personal changes, as anybody does. And you can watch them grow, and not just personally, but with their businesses, because it doesn't take them too long to figure out that they could do some marvelous things if they worked together. And the other characters that you meet along the way go through changes too, just as regular human beings do. So it's fun to tag along with this group of characters. Now, for the telling of the stories, China's the main character, so she tells the story in first person, I. Okay? This entire book, the first book of the series, is China talking in first person. Now, often with the books, she does break the plane between the character and the reader, especially at the beginning, where she'll usually say, if we haven't met yet, my name's China Bayles and I run Time and Seasons in Pecan Springs, Texas. Something like that. So occasionally she will address the audience, okay? But Susan does dabble around with other points of view throughout the series. So as the series goes on, you may have a chapter that's narrated by China, and the next one might be in third person because it's focusing on somebody else in the area. And this gives us a wider point of view and gives us insights to things that are happening out of China's line of sight. I think that's a cool thing. Some of the books in this series, especially later on, really get into the herbs and the plants, and the chapters will start with an excerpt from a real book or a real article or a quote from somebody famous. And so things get, it's not cookie cutter, it's not copycat books one after another exactly the same, okay? And when we get to the last book so far in the series, which is called Hemlock, there's another interesting technique that Susan uses. It's told in China's first person, but one of the characters is writing a book. One of the other characters is writing a book about an herbalist from the 1700s, and she's given China her manuscript to read, and so the manuscript is included in here. And when you see that, it's offset with ivy margins on the pages, so that you know that that's where it's coming from. It's a very cool technique. So she changes it up with these things, okay? So like I said, they're not one after the other exactly the same. And I'm sure it's more interesting for her to write that way, and it's certainly more interesting and fulfilling for us to read, right? Okay, so as I record this program, there are 28 episodes in the China Bayles series, starting with Time of Death, came out in 1992, and the most recent one, like I said, Hemlock, came out in 2021. Almost all of the titles have something to do with herbs, since that's what China is into. Now, you don't have to like herbs or plants or know much about them to like these stories, okay? You probably will pick up tidbits about them along the way. I suggest that you give this series a try. Like I said, you will find out a lot about herbs and plants, both common and uncommon ones. Start the series at the beginning, as I always recommend. If you find that you like the characters, then you will have plenty of reading enjoyment ahead of you, because in addition to the 28 installments in the regular series, there are at least 5 extra books that you can find that will continue your reading enjoyment. Right? And the first book is called China's Book of Days, which goes through the calendar year and has all kinds of crafts and recipes and gardening tips and more from the character of China herself. And you've got this book called An Untimely Death, which is a collection of 10 short stories featuring China and the other characters from Pecan Springs. And then there's a set of 3 novellas. I'm getting this all from her website, susanalbert.com. There's a set of 3 novellas called the Pecan Springs Enterprise Trilogy. And no, that is not a Star Trek connection at all. The Enterprise is the name of the newspaper in Pecan Springs. So these novellas focus on other people in the town and not on China. So could be on Ruby Wilcox. It could be on Jessica Nelson, who writes for the newspaper, The Enterprise. So there's 3 books in this novella series, and their titles are Deadlines, Fault Lines, and Fire Lines. Okay? And so that's the China Bayles series. 28 books, plus 5 more, plus who knows how much more we could get. Okay? It's her longest running series, and as far as we know, this saga will continue. Yay. Next up, number 2 is the Darling Dahlias series. That's hard to say fast. Okay, I'm probably going to mess it up in the next 3 minutes. The Darling Dahlias series begins with the Darling Dahlias and the Cucumber Tree, which came out in 2010. These stories are featured in the fictional town of Darling, Alabama, which Susan describes as being located in a real place, the beautiful wooded hills of southern Alabama, about 70 miles north of Mobile, west of Monroeville, and east of the Alabama River. Again, if you don't know Alabama, get a map. You can figure out where this is. Okay? So, setting is in Darling, Alabama, and the Dahlias are a group of ladies who make up the garden club in town. These books are set in the 1930s. The first one takes place in May of 1930. Darling is a small town. People are dealing with the Depression years. Nobody has very much. Everybody has to make do. And yet, some unusual and interesting things happen in Darling. The Dahlias are made up of a variety of women, including many who hold jobs in town. The main characters are the club officers, and every book always has a list of the club officers. And so the main characters are usually Liz Lacey, Elizabeth Lacey, Ophelia Snow, and Verna Tidwell. So, in addition to being interested in gardens, the Dahlias also dabble in gossip. And so this is more of a group effort, an ensemble who gets together and tries to figure out when something untoward happens. They try to figure out what's been going on. It is helpful that Liz works for a lawyer. Verna works with records in the courthouse. Myra May is one of the operators on a local telephone exchange. So they all have special talents, special ways to glean information. They're a fun group to hang out with. It's also fun to go back in time to see, how people lived in the 1930s, what tools and amenities they had back then, how they lived their daily lives. They had just recently gotten telephones, and the town has its own telephone exchange, but a lot of people are on party lines. So that's interesting too. And so you can read these books and consider how some things have changed, but when it comes to people and relationships, some things are just like today. Now, the series is told in third person in order to follow all of the characters around as they do their visiting and investigating, shall we say. Susan does break the plane again at the beginning of every book because the Dahlias write an official letter to the reader, dear reader, in which they explain that something has happened and that Mrs. Albert is going to tell their story for them, which is cool. Now, there are currently 10 titles in the series. This is an ongoing series. I have read them all. The most recent one came out in 2022 and is called The Darling Dahlias and the Red Hot Poker. Okay, so these take place in the 1930s. This one started in 1930. This one takes place in 1935. So we've covered 5 years with 10 books so far. Okay, again, Dahlias are a fun group to hang out with. And again, to go back in the 1930s and think of how people we're dealing with everything. Again, you don't have to know a lot about gardening to appreciate these books, but of course, if you're into it, you're going to understand some of the things that they're into. And you may like them even more. Okay, so we've got China Bayles and the darling Dahlias. The next series is The Cottage Tales of Beatrix Potter. There are 8 books in this series. It is a finished series. There will be no more, sadly. There will be no more episodes. I have read all of them. The first book is called The Tale of Hilltop Farm, which came out in 2004. And the 8th and last book is The Tale of Castle Cottage, which came out in 2011. As you may remember, Beatrix Potter was a children's book author and illustrator who lived in England at the turn of the last century. And she was the creator of the Little Peter Rabbit books, Little Peter Rabbit stories, along with stories about other characters, which she not only wrote, but illustrated, right? Remember Peter Rabbit and all of his little animal friends? Okay. So what you may not remember is that, or may not even know, is that when Beatrix Potter made enough money from her Little Peter Rabbit stories, she left London and she bought property, a farm, in the Lake District of Northern England. And she ran the farm at a time and a place where women were not usually given that responsibility. And so these books are set in the area of Sawrey, S-A-W-R-E-Y. First one starts with Miss Potter showing up in 1905. Here's the author's note at the beginning of the book. This book and others that follow in the Cottage Tales series trace the arc of Beatrix Potter's life from 1905, when she purchased Hilltop Farm in the village of Sawrey, through 1913, when she married William Hillis and went to Sawrey to live. If you have visited the Lake District of England, you may recognize the names of villages, towns, lakes, woods, and even actual houses, for I have chosen many of these lovely and very real places as settings for these books. But with the exception of Beatrix, her family, her friends, and her animal companions, the characters and their stories are entirely imaginary. The real people are noted with an asterisk in the cast of characters. All others appearing in this book are flights of the author's fancy. Okay, and so then the books always start with a map of the area and a cast of characters. Okay, so this is historical fiction with a twist. First of all, historical fiction plus mystery, but an additional twist, and the twist is that the animals also talk. The pets, the farm animals, the animals living in the wild, they all talk to each other, okay? And when they are talking to each other, you know that that's what's happening because their conversations are in italics. And of course, they try to figure out, the animals try to figure out the challenges and the problems that the humans in their area are facing. And of course, the humans, if they're encountering the animals talking, don't understand what the animals are usually saying. Usually don't understand what they're saying. You will meet cats like Crumpet and Tabitha Twitchit, for example. And the stories are told in the kind of writing style that was popular in England in the early 1900s. And so, got the map and the cast of characters at the end, at the beginning. At the end, there are usually historical notes, maybe a bibliography, maybe recipes, okay, from the area, okay. So this action surrounds the very real Miss Potter in the Lake District in the early years of 1900, and you have to suspend your disbelief about the animals communicating with one another. You know, there are other mystery series by other authors where the animals talk. If you're not into that kind of thing, okay, fair enough. You know, if you are an animal lover or if you've never read one of those kinds of books, I recommend that you give the Cottage Tales of Beatrix Potter a try. Again, you're not losing anything by trying, right? And yes, you can enter the series at any time, but as usual, I'm going to tell you to start with the first one, The Tale of Hilltop Farm. Also, another recommendation. I highly recommend that either while you are reading the series or before you read the stories, you read a biography of Beatrix Potter. And this one is by Judy Taylor. It's one of the better ones in my opinion. And it is called Beatrix Potter, Artist, Storyteller, and Countrywoman. This is the revised edition. Both it and its successor are probably out of print, but a lot of libraries have them. And so you could read another biography of her too. The advantage to this will be you will understand so much more. You will get context and background information that these books don't get into. That's what I highly recommend. You'll be able to even anticipate some of what happens. Okay. And you may even want to go back to the little Peter Rabbit stories, which I'm sure your public libraries have. Okay. The little Peter Rabbit stories with the beautiful little color illustrations that Beatrix herself made. I mean, how cool is that? So that's the Cottage Tales of Beatrix Potter. 8 books in all. If you got the biography, that's 9. If you go for all the Peter Rabbit stories, that's many more. Okay? So this would make a fun season of reading in any case. All right. Now, lastly, Susan Wittig Albert and her husband Bill collaborated on a series. And it's a mystery series based in England. They wrote it together. Instead of saying their real names, they wrote it together under the pseudonym of Robin Paige, P-A-I-G-E. And so these are called the Robin Paige Mysteries. Okay? And the first one is Death at Bishop's Keep. It says a Victorian mystery, came out in 1998. The 12th and last book in the series is called Death on the Lizard. An Edwardian mystery, came out in 2006. Now, the first 9 books in the series are subtitled A Victorian Mystery. The last 3 are subtitled An Edwardian Mystery because we are straddling the reigns of Queen Victoria and her son Edward VII in England, okay? And so if you're not into history, that is again the turn of the last century. This one starts in 1894. This one ends in 1903, I think. This one takes place in 1903. So that's the range of the years that we're working with here. This is historical fiction with a mystery included. They're set in England, okay? And there are 2 main characters. There's Kate, her real name is Catherine Ardley, and there is Sir Charles Sheridan. Kate is an American, and she has just moved, at the beginning of the series, she has just moved to England. I'm not going to explain why. She's just moved to England. And she meets Sir Charles Sheridan because something untoward has happened. And Kate, just like Louisa May Alcott, writes Blood and Thunder Penny Dreadfuls and makes some money doing it. And so she's always on the lookout for a good story. So when something untoward happens, she wants to figure out what's going on. Sir Charles Sheridan is a local aristocratic kind of person, in a way. He is a photographer. He's also an amateur forensic archaeologist. And he wants to get to the bottom of what's going on too, because it interrupted an archaeological dig that he was photographing. Okay, that's how it starts. Now, so the stories cover the mystery, but it also covers how Kate and Charles meet and what that's going to lead to maybe. And again, both of them do their best to try to figure out what's going on. What makes these books historical fiction is that real life people show up. Winston Churchill, Jenny Churchill, Lily Langtry, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Oscar Wilde, William Butler Yeats. People show up because Sir Charles has connections and he knows a lot of people, and it's cool. Now, I have to admit that I refrained from reading this series for the longest time because I usually don't read books that take place in England. But to show you, I got these, the first one and the last one. And the last one, Death on the Lizard, and the Lizard is the peninsula, the most southwestern peninsula in England. I got this one because it was the easiest one to get at my library. And so I read it first. Shh, I didn't take my advice. I read it first. I liked the characters so much. When I finally got the first one through our library system, I started over, and I'm gonna read the whole thing from front to back now. Because I like Kate and Charles and I want to see what happens. That's the thing, they snag you, don't they? These series, you know, they give you compelling stories and compelling characters, and that's what happens, right? Okay, now as you advance in the series, they usually start with these books start with a list of characters, so you know what's going to take place. Again, the first one starts in 1894, and the last one, I think it's in 1903. These stories are told in third person, although certain chapters will focus more on Kate or more on Charles or more on somebody else. But they're told in third person, again, to give the widest point of view that you can have. And again, like I said, the first 9 are subtitled A Victorian Mystery, and the last 3 are subtitled An Edwardian Mystery. So to encompass the whole scope of it, they're called the Robin Paige Mysteries. Paige. And that's all. Those are the 4 series. The bottom line in here is Susan Wittig Albert has given us a ton of things to read, don't you think? A variety, you know, set in the United States, 2 set in the United States, 2 set in England, in historical times. So you can choose between China Bayles, the Darling Dahlias, the Tales of Beatrix Potter and all the animals in the Lake District of England, and the Robin Paige mysteries, which are more in southern England, and all kinds of intrigue go on with all kinds of interesting famous people that you figure you learn more things about, okay? You can find all of these details on Susan's website, www.susanalbert.com. She's got a marvelous website, shows all the books, all of the series, and then she's got some standalone nonfiction books too that you might be interested in. Have you read any of these series? Have you read any of them? Which ones do you like? You like China Bayles? You like the Darling Dahlias? You like all of them? Which ones have you read? I'd love to hear your comments. Feel free to share your experiences with them below. You know, again, no problem if you don't like animals that talk. There's other things to read here. There's other things to read. And as usual, I would love to thank my local library, the Levi Haywood Memorial Library, and the C.W. Mars Library System for providing me with visual illustrations for books that I don't currently own. But like I said, I'm in the middle of reading this first book, and I'm going to continue with this series because there's 12 books in the series. Okay. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. There you go. Lots of reading recommendations, and I'll probably have more for you in the future. So my name's Corrine Smith. Now go read some good mystery book today.